Welcome to the 96th episode of I Wrote This News. Today is Saturday, April 16, 2022. Every weekend, we will give you a wrap-up of the week's events, highlighting and expanding on listener favorites from the week. Let's dive in. Story number 1, When Mushrooms Do People. Buried in forest litter or sprouting from trees, fungi might give the impression of being silent and relatively self-contained organisms. But mathematical analysis of the electrical signals fungi seemingly send to one another has identified patterns that bear a striking structural similarity to human speech. Previous research has suggested that fungi conduct electrical impulses through long, underground filamentous structures called hyphae, similar to how nerve cells transmit information in humans. It has even shown that the firing rate of these impulses increases when the hyphae of wood-digesting fungi come into contact with wooden blocks, raising the possibility that fungi use this electrical language to share information about food or injury with distant parts of themselves, or with hyphae-connected partners such as trees. But do these trains of electrical activity have anything in common with human language? To investigate, Professor Andrew Adamatsky at the University of the West of England's Unconventional Computing Laboratory in Bristol analyzed the patterns of electrical spikes generated by 4 species of fungi: enoki, split-gill, ghost and caterpillar fungi. He did this by inserting tiny microelectrodes into substrates colonized by their patchwork of hyphae threads, their mycelia. We do not know if there is a direct relationship between spiking patterns and fungi and human speech. Possibly not, Adamatsky said. On the other hand, there are many similarities in information processing in living substrates of different classes, families, and species. I was just curious to compare. The research, published in Royal Society Open Science, found that these spikes often clustered into trains of activity, resembling vocabularies of up to 50 words, and that the distribution of these fungal word lengths closely matched those of human languages. Split gills, which grow on decaying wood, and whose fruiting bodies resemble undulating waves of tightly packed coral, generated the most complex sentences of all. The most likely reasons for these waves of electrical activity are to maintain the fungi's integrity, analogous to wolves howling to maintain the integrity of the pack, or to report newly discovered sources of attractants and repellents to other parts of their mycelia, Adamski suggested. Adamski said, quote, "There is also another option, they are saying nothing. Propagating mycelium tips are electrically charged, and, therefore, when the charged tips pass in a pair of differential electrodes, a spike in the potential difference is recorded. Whatever these spiking events represent, they do not appear to be random," he added. Story number 2, Artificial intelligence gives Val Kilmer his voice once again. Val Kilmer, the star of movies as wide-ranging as Top Gun, Batman Forever, Heat, and The Prince of Egypt, withdrew from the public eye following a throat cancer diagnosis and 2 tracheotomies, which left his ability to express himself vocally severely impaired. He now speaks using a voice box. Speaking, once my joy and lifeblood, has become an hourly struggle, Kilmer wrote in his 2020 memoir I'm Your Huckleberry, describing his voice as, quote, Marlon Brando after a couple of bottles of tequila. It isn't a frog in my throat, more like a buffalo. But now, fans of the actor can once again hear his voice. Kilmer, who is returning to the big screen in the long-awaited sequel Top Gun: Maverick later this year, has partnered with tech company Synantic to generate a version of his speech using artificial intelligence, based on existing footage and recordings of his voice. Let's listen into what that sounds like.
We all have the capacity to be creative. We're all driven to share our deepest dreams and ideas with the world. When we think of the most talented creative people, they speak to us in a unique way. A phrase we often hear is having a creative voice. But I was struck by throat cancer. After getting treated, my voice as I knew it was taken away from me. People around me struggle to understand me when I'm talking. But despite all that, I still feel I'm the exact same person. Still the same creative soul. The soul that dreams ideas and stories constantly. But now I can express myself again. I can bring these dreams to you and show you this part of myself once more. A part that was never truly gone, just hiding away.
As many of you now know, our entire show is produced using similar technology. Every word I've ever spoken on this podcast was first written or edited by Bob Neese, then converted to audio using artificial intelligence technology. Here's what that sounds like when the AI technology is tasked with rendering some of the same text in Bob's voice.
We all have the capacity to be creative. We are all driven to share our deepest dreams and ideas with the world. When we think of the most talented, creative people, they speak to us in a unique way. A phrase we often hear is having a creative voice. I still feel I'm the exact same person, still the same creative soul, a soul that dreams ideas and stories constantly. But now I can express myself again. I can bring these dreams to you and show you this part of myself once more, a part that was never truly gone, just hiding away.
We hope you've enjoyed the experiment that this podcast has offered. We will be doing about one more week's worth of episodes, and then we will take a breather before we move on to something else. Here's to technology giving Mr. Kilmer's voice back to him, and here's to using technology to make lives truly better. Story number 3, I'll see your Hunter Biden and raise you a Jared Kushner. 6 months after leaving the White House, Jared Kushner secured a $2 billion investment from a fund led by the Saudi Crown Prince, a close ally during the Trump administration, despite objections from the fund's advisors about the merits of the deal. A panel that screens investments for the main Saudi sovereign wealth fund cited concerns about the proposed deal with Mr. Kushner's newly formed private equity firm, Affinity Partners, previously undisclosed documents show. Those objections included the inexperience of the Affinity Fund management, the possibility that the kingdom would be responsible for the bulk of the investment and risk, due diligence on the fledgling firm's operations that found them unsatisfactory in all aspects, a proposed asset management fee that seems excessive, and public relations risks from Mr. Kushner's prior role as a senior advisor to his father-in-law, former President Donald J. Trump, according to minutes of the panel's meeting last June 30th. But days later, the full board of the $620 billion public investment fund, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler and a beneficiary of Mr. Kushner's support when he worked as a White House advisor, overruled the panel. Mr. Kushner, whose fund has not publicly disclosed a theme or focus, has little experience or track record in private equity. Before working in the White House, he ran his family's commercial real estate empire, sometimes with disappointing results. His best-known deal was the $1.8 billion purchase of the office tower at 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. In 2007, the building's mortgage became a crippling liability when the recession hit the next year. But Kushner has demonstrated at least one skill that the Saudi prince likely values quite highly. He played a leading role inside the Trump administration defending Crown Prince Mohammed after U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that he had approved the 2018 killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi columnist for the Washington Post and resident of Virginia who had criticized the kingdom's rulers. Kushner's fund is expected to rake in management fees of $25 million per year due to the Saudi investment. Story number 4, is that you, Mr. Obvious? U.S. President Joe Biden said for the first time that Moscow's invasion of Ukraine amounts to genocide, as President Vladimir Putin said Russia would rhythmically and calmly continue its operation and achieve its goals. Biden told reporters as he prepared to board Air Force One, quote, "Yes, I called it genocide because it has become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of being able to be Ukrainian, and the evidence is mounting." Biden has repeatedly called Putin a war criminal, but delivering a speech at an ethanol plant in Iowa earlier on Tuesday, the U.S. president escalated his rhetoric to accuse Russia of genocide. Biden said, quote, "We'll let the lawyers decide internationally whether or not it qualifies, but it sure seems that way to me."
Hello and welcome to the Mr. Obvious Show. I'm your host, Mr. Obvious. Let's go right to the phones.
Sounds just like him, yeah.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Obvious Show.
Hello. Is this Mr. Obvious?
Speaking.
Wikipedia says that any of the following constitutes a war crime: intentionally killing, unnecessarily destroying civilian property, wartime sexual violence, and flouting the legal distinctions of proportionality and military necessity. Many towns Russia has retreated from in northern Ukraine were littered with the bodies of civilians killed in what Kiev says was a campaign of murder, torture, and rape. Moscow's nearly 7-week-long incursion, the biggest attack on a European state since 1945, has seen more than 4.6 million people flee abroad, killed or injured thousands, and left Russia increasingly isolated on the world stage. The Kremlin says it launched a special military operation on Feb. 24 to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Kiev and its Western allies reject that as a false pretext for the invasion. Putin on Tuesday used his first public comments on the conflict in more than a week to say Russia would rhythmically and calmly continue its operation, and expressed confidence his goals, including on security, would be achieved. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky mocked Putin in an early morning address on Wednesday, How could a plan that provides for the death of tens of thousands of their own soldiers in a little more than a month of war come about? Yeah, that's a nice plan you've got there, Comrade Putin. Story number 5. Texas Governor Abbott calls 8-ball in corner pocket. Florida Governor DeSantis says not so fast. A bus from Texas arrived in Washington, D.C. Wednesday morning, transporting dozens of illegal immigrants as part of Texas Governor Greg Abbott's new plan to counter federal immigration policies during an ongoing border crisis. Abbott announced last week that he was directing the Texas Division of Emergency Management to transport migrants released from federal custody in Texas to the nation's capital and other locations outside his state. The bus pulled up at approximately 8 a.m. local time, blocks away from the U.S. Capitol building. Fox News reports that they came from the Del Rio sector in Texas, after coming to the U.S. from Colombia, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. In a lovely twist, the migrants said that they are planning to head down to Miami, Florida, likely by train. However, Republican Florida Governor and Ballard stand-in Ron DeSantis is taking issue with the fact that the migrants are planning to head to the Sunshine State, with his executive office issuing a clear message: do not come. The executive office of the governor of Florida issued a statement saying, quote, "To those who have entered the country illegally, fair warning, do not come to Florida. Life will not be easy for you, because we are obligated to uphold the immigration laws of this country, even if our federal government and other states won't." At least 5 of the migrants said that they had arrived at the border on Saturday and had requested asylum. Once migrants are processed by federal authorities and released from custody, they are allowed to move throughout the country while they go through immigration court proceedings. An immigration judge will ultimately decide if they are allowed to remain in the U.S. or be deported. The DeSantis statement continued, quote, "Florida is not a sanctuary state, and our social programs are designed to serve the citizens of our state. The governor will protect the sovereignty of the state of Florida." Both Abbott and DeSantis claim to be Christians. As such, they might want to refresh their memories about their faith by checking out the last half of Matthew chapter 25. That's the one in which Jesus says that however one treats strangers, and by this scripture means foreigners, that's how one is treating Jesus himself. Not only that, but Jesus seems to say that the way we treat others, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the poor, the sick, the imprisoned, is a key factor in our standing before God. Check it out, straight from the source. This is Jesus talking. "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison, and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Now listen again to what DeSantis has to say about Florida's approach to taking care of people. Quote, "Florida is not a sanctuary state, and our social programs are designed to serve the citizens of our state. The governor will protect the sovereignty of the state of Florida. Maybe we should take up collection for graham crackers, marshmallows, and chocolate bars. Governor DeSantis may wind up in a great place, more making place for the rest of eternity." April 16th is the 106th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar. 259 days remain until the end of the year. It's also Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. On this date in 73, Masada, a Jewish fortress, falls to the Romans after several months of siege, ending the First Jewish-Roman War. Masada is an ancient fortification in the southern district of Israel situated on top of an isolated rock plateau, akin to a mesa. It is located on the eastern edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea 20 kilometers, or 12 miles, east of Arad. Herod the Great built 2 palaces for himself on the mountain and fortified Masada about 100 years earlier. According to Josephus, the siege of Masada by Roman troops from at the end of the First Jewish-Roman War ended in the mass suicide of the 960 Sicarii rebels who were hiding there. However, the archaeological evidence relevant to this event is ambiguous at best and is rejected entirely by some scholars. 1910, the oldest existing indoor ice hockey arena still used for the sport in the 21st century, Boston Arena, opens for the first time. 1912, Harriet Quimby becomes the first woman to fly an airplane across the English Channel. Harriet Quimby's public life began in 1902, when she began writing for the San Francisco Dramatic Review and also contributed to the Sunday editions of the San Francisco Chronicle and San Francisco Call. She moved to Manhattan, New York City in 1903 to work as a theater critic for Leslie's Illustrated Weekly, and more than 250 of her articles were published over a 9-year period. Quimby became interested in aviation in 1910 when she attended the Belmont Park International Aviation Tournament in Elmont, New York. There she met John Moisant, a well-known aviator and operator of a flight school, and his sister Matilda. On August 1, 1911, Quimby took her pilot's test and became the first U.S. woman to earn an Aero Club of America Aviator's certificate. Matilda Moyson soon followed and became the second. 1943, Albert Hofmann accidentally discovers the hallucinogenic effects of the research drug LSD. He intentionally takes the drug 3 days later on April 19th.
This is the head of a pin, magnified 100 times. What you see now is 200 micrograms of LSD. That's the full dose to send a normal adult on an 8 to 12-hour trip.
The only time I think I've been able to understand myself was on an acid trip. Then things were really clear.
1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. pens his letter from Birmingham jail while incarcerated in Birmingham, Alabama, for protesting against segregation. The open letter says that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and to take direct action rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. In the letter, King wrote, quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The letter, written in response to a call for unity during the 1963 Birmingham campaign, was widely published and became an important text for the American civil rights movement. The letter has been described as one of the most important historical documents penned by a modern political prisoner and is considered a classic document of civil disobedience. Celebrating birthdays today are singer Bobby Vinton, artist Joan Snyder, basketball great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, voice actor Billy West, actress Ellen Barkin, actor John Cryer, comedian Martin Lawrence, poet Tracy K. Smith, actress Claire Foy, singer Chance the Rapper, and Pope Benedict XVI. He turns 95 today. Happy birthday to all of them, and if your birthday is today, a very happy birthday to you as well. By the way, if you or someone you know is having a birthday and would like us to announce it on the show, leave us a voice message or send an email. The links are in the show notes. Today's news was brought to us by The Guardian, Coffee or Die, The New York Times, The New York Post, Reuters, Fox News, CNN, The Bible, and the website chock full of not-so-artificial intelligence, Wikipedia. If you have a comment or a question about anything you've heard today, or if you have a suggestion, please send us a note at IWTN, all one word, at thatradioshow.com. That email address one more time is IWTN, all one word, at thatradioshow.com.
One more thing, if this podcast sounds a little funny, that's because it's also an experiment. All of the vocals were generated using AI technology. Hopefully the show will sound different and better as the tech improves and as we improve at using it. I'm Bob Neese, hoping you have an amazing day. We'll get together again soon.